tomar el Tour de Arquitectura de Chicago, una experiencia única e imperdible. Si vienes a conocer la ciudad de los vientos, no te puedes perder de esta joya. Se trata de un recorrido donde podrás encontrar desde tesoros escondidos hasta los lugares más conocidos de la ciudad, incluyendo más de 40 edificios notables como Navy Pier, el edificio Wrigley y el edificio John Hancock. Los tours de arquitectura que ofrece la empresa Soul Sightseeing parten de dos muelles, uno en Michigan Avenue y el otro en Navy Pier, no importa desde qué muelle se salga. Se podrá ver todas las vistas espectaculares mientras se recorre el río Chicago. El recorrido dura unos 60 minutos con un precio a la fecha del video de $47. El recorrido cubre los tres brazos del río Chicago, pasando por el East Bank Club, el antiguo edificio de correos y la Torre Willis, antes conocida como Torre Sears. Descubriendo estos extraordinarios lugares de Chicago con nuestro guía, un experto en arquitectura que nos narrará el mito, la historia y origen de la ciudad y sus edificios. El recorrido tiene dos opciones de idioma, una narrada en español con horarios especiales, lo cual les recomiendo. Lo chequen antes de comprar su ticket, y la otra en inglés, la cual nosotros tomamos y es realmente increíble. A continuación daremos paso a la explicación del guía que tuvimos la fortuna de tener, esperamos lo disfruten.
You're going to see some beautiful, beautiful sights here today. You're going to see some really spectacular buildings, hear all about their history and architecture, how they came to be made. But you're also going to hear a little bit about the story of Chicago today. And I want you to walk away knowing this, that the story of Chicago is a story of resiliency, it is a story of strength, tenacity, grit in the face of problems or challenges. It's a nearly 2-century-long journey of self-improvement, of city trying to make itself better, make itself more beautiful for its citizens and its visitors. And so today what we're going to do is I'm going to use the tool of the architecture of the city to talk about this resiliency. But we are also going to have exactly one boatload of fun here today. So whether you are from Chicago, from across the country, or across the world, we're now all on vacation, so sit back, relax, grab a drink from our amazing bartender Elise downstairs, and enjoy your time here with us at Shoreline Sightseeing. So first up on our architectural journey is over here on our right with this beautiful clock tower. This is the Wrigley Building. The Wrigley Building with the clock tower was built in the early 1920s, about 100 years ago. It is a style of architecture called Spanish Revival style. Spanish Revival, we call it that because that clock tower up there was modeled after La Giralda, which is a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. The top part of that clock tower up there is similar to the top of this cathedral you can see in southern Spain. And looking at the Wrigley Building, this is what we were doing in the US in the early 1920s, copying all these European styles of architecture. In the early 1920s, the US didn't really have its own identity in architecture yet, so we were still copying a lot of Europe. It wouldn't be until a couple of years later that we'd finally get a style uniquely our own, uniquely American. We'll talk about that style once we can see it from the river. But let's jump ahead about 80 years to Trump International Hotel and Tower. This is the second tallest tower in all of Chicago at 1,389 feet. And this is a style of architecture called contextualism. Contextualism. You see those three patios on the building? Those patios all correspond to heights of neighboring buildings. The first patio corresponds to the roof of the Wrigley Building, which we just spoke about. That second patio corresponds to the height of that dome building across the river called the Jewelers Building. We'll talk about it later. And then that third patio way up there corresponds to the height of this black box building you're going to start to see right behind the Trump Tower, black building called the AMA Plaza. But that's the idea of contextualism. It is a site-specific design, custom-made for its environment, all about blending in with your surroundings, harmonizing with these other buildings in the neighborhood. TV shows, films, commercials over the years. Steve McQueen's final film, The Hunter, drove a car off the side of the building. In the most recent Candyman remake, there was a lovely murder on a balcony. So lots of cool stuff has been shot there. And here at Shoreline, we always just call these the Corn Cob Towers. I don't know why. Big mystery to me. But in the 1960s, when these were built, nobody was really living in the downtown area of Chicago here. And there was an architect from Chicago named Bertrand Goldberg. Bertrand Goldberg wanted to change that. He wanted to attract people to live downtown. So he built this utopian, vertically stacked world. He built a city within a city. Because a marina city, when those buildings were built, you could have everything you need, live above the river. In these buildings, you could find restaurants, shops, a swimming pool, a skating rink, a bowling alley, a movie theater, and of course, at the bottom, plenty of parking, a key essential to living in downtown Chicago. If you have a car down here, parking, it is very precious. And we will see more from Bertrand Goldberg later, more circular buildings. I know the idea of having all these amenities is not really new for us in 2023, but in the 60s when they were built, the idea of having it all within your apartment complex, never really having to leave, was a totally new concept. So Bertrand Goldberg really pioneering a new form of apartment living. Well, let's jump. Chicago is here today. All of us are here today because of this body of water. The Chicago River is the waterway that connects Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River. That is why Chicago was built where it is, because this river meets the lake not too far away east, and then it will continue eventually all the way to the Mississippi. So we were just a really important shipping canal in the U.S. By the late 1800s, Chicago was the busiest port in America, and we've been a center of trade, commerce, transportation ever since that time period, all tracing back to the river. Now, people often ask me about the color of the river. Is this its natural green color? Yes, it is. It's the natural color due to mainly algae at the bottom. It's also a relatively shallow river. But I think people ask me about that because if you ever want to see the river unnaturally green, you should come here in March for St. Patrick's Day. Ever since the 1960s, the Plumbers Union of Chicago has been dyeing the river bright, bright shamrock green every March for St. Patrick's Day. When I say bright green, I mean it. It is just neon green, very intense sight, but a very fun Chicago tradition, maybe our weirdest ones. If you've never seen that before, come back in March, sail down the Green River. People, they have a great time, we'll put it that way. If you go back in March though, I would say bring another coats, or 3. Well, let's return to the 1920s with the Merchandise Mart, this enormous structure on the right. The Merchandise Mart is a style, an iconic style called Art Deco. Art Deco. This has all the classic features of that Art Deco style. Deep dark windows, these soaring racing stripe vertical lines, the Indiana limestone tan color, and then the fancy details, in this case, gold diamonds. So this was the style for the roaring 1920s, ornate, elegant, ostentatious. If each generation sort of takes their own values and expresses them in 3 dimensions through architecture, then the Merchandise Mart and Art Deco were expressing the luxury, optimism, hope for the future of the roaring 1920s. Let's start on the left with the New Veen building, the curvy green building here. The New Veen building is another example of contextualism because you'll notice the curve here in the river. The blue glass matches the blue of the sky and the turquoise matches the green of the river. So that is contextualism as well. We're trying to blend in with the natural context, in this case the beautiful green curving river. Now straight ahead of us, these 2 enormous glass buildings with very interesting shapes. So on the right is River Point, that tall glass building with the arches at the top and the bottom, River Point from 2017. With those arches at the top and bottom, we do like to call that one the Hot Pocket. And then next door, oh, first of all, I should say, looks like the train's coming over the bridge. It's gonna be a classic Chicago photo right here, just saying. But straight ahead of us, the Y-shaped base building is 150 North Riverside. From 2017 as well. Now it has this unique Y-shaped base for 2 reasons. Number 1, so that the building's caissons, the foundations of the building, that they're not interfering with the Metro and Amtrak train lines that run underneath the ground right by the side of the building. And number 2, the city has a rule for a 30-foot setback for a river walk for all the new buildings built on the river. Really important to us here in Chicago to keep our waterways, the river and lake, open and clear for pedestrians, for everybody to enjoy. So that's how we end up with just a very, very specific Y-shaped design here. Now the base of this building is amazingly only 39 feet wide, so about 13 meters wide, quite narrow, and it's pretty tall. So we're going to deal with a little thing called building sway in the wind. So to bring down the sway in this tower, inside the top of this tower, just imagine, inside the top is 160,000 gallons of water in 12 separate tanks. What happens is when the building starts to sway in one direction, all that water just slushes, goes in the opposite direction to correct for the sway. It's a big water shock absorber. The inertia creates this balancing liquid force that brings the building back to rest really, really quickly. So the building goes one way, water goes the other way, sort of canceling each other out. Time machine here, because the next 5 buildings coming up on the right, were all built in chronological order. So they demonstrate the evolution of architecture across the U.S. First up on our right, this is 2 Riverside Plaza. 2 Riverside is more Art Deco, deep dark windows, racing stripe vertical lines, Indiana limestone tan color, and then carvings on the front, clocks, the roaring 1920s. But then what happened in 1929? The stock market, it crashed, and we entered the Great Depression. Excuse me. And there's a virtual freeze on the building of office buildings from 1930 to 1957. Over 25 years of really no building offices across the country. But when we reboot architecture in the late 50s and 60s, oh hey, what's up? When we reboot architecture, we jump right into black box modernism, which you can see over here on the right in Gateway Centers 1 and 2. Black box modernism. Now the father of this minimalist style of architecture was a man named Mies van der Rohe, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, very famous German architect who then based himself here in Chicago. And he said, less is more. Less is more. So I think there's a really elegant simplicity to these black boxes. They are dark office buildings with gold statues, carvings. They said offices are machines for working. So keep it simple, keep costs down. That's what they did. And they built over 60 of these buildings, 60 of these black boxes in just Chicago alone in a pretty short period of time. If you walk around the city, you'll start to notice these black boxes really that made the owners kind of sad. So they spent over $800,000 to put themselves literally on the map. This to our left is a giant "You Are Here" map of the Chicago River. That little red Lego represents this building on the river. We went down the main branch on the right, we turned south, and now we are at this building. Wow, so helpful. Next time anyone's lost in downtown Chicago and you drop your phone in the river, just like, gotta look up at that building. You'll know exactly where to go. Very thoughtful. But on our right, another enormous Art Deco building, which you may recognize if you are a Batman fan, because this is where Heath Ledger's Joker robbed a Gotham City bank in the 2008 film, The Dark Knight. If anyone remembers the movie, the Joker drives this big school bus full of cash straight out of that building in the opening scene of the film. Spoiler alert, sorry. But before that, this was the old post office. So this building was built almost 100 years ago now. This was the largest post office in the world. Now, maybe you're asking yourselves, hey, well, why did Chicago need such a big post office? Well, before Amazon, before the amazing invention of online shopping, Chicago was the mail order catalog capital of the world. We had the likes of Sears department store here, among others. We needed this incredibly large post office to handle such an incredible volume. Now, nowadays, though, no longer problems or challenges, but I want you to just sort of keep that resiliency in the back of your minds as you listen to these next couple of stories. So here's the first story. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Now, in talking about this fire from 1871, arguably Chicago's most famous historic event, there's a lot of myth surrounding the fire, so we need to first separate the facts from the fiction. So I want to start with the fiction. Okay, the following is the not true story. This is the untrue story. This is the myth, the legend. It goes like this. In 1871, they say that a cow from Mrs. O'Leary's barn, so the legend goes. Hey, what's up? They said that this cow got very upset with Mrs. O'Leary, and that the cow kicked over a kerosene lantern that she was holding, which started this whole barn on fire. And then soon they say, in a matter of hours, that the whole city of Chicago was ablaze, all from the kick of a single cow. Now maybe that story, maybe that jogged a memory somewhere in your brain of hearing about some cow starting a fire in Chicago at some point in your life. The cow story, it has really gotten around over the years. They used to teach it in many, many schools, and I get it, you know, it's simple. It evokes so many images, but it is not true. Now, it is true. Mrs. O'Leary was a real person. Her name was Catherine O'Leary. She was an Irish immigrant who had a barn here in Chicago. And it's true, Mrs. O'Leary owned a cow. And it is true that we believe the fire did begin in her barn. But listen, crucially, there is absolutely no proof whatsoever to pin it on this cow or on poor Mrs. O'Leary or anyone else for that matter. We don't know how the fire truly began, and we never ever will. But the city of Chicago, they officially exonerated Mrs. O'Leary and her cow very swiftly in 1997. So only took 125 years, but they did. They cleared her name. Now, here are the facts of the fire that we do know. In the mid-1800s, Chicago's population is exploding with industrialization, new jobs. We went from 4,000 people in 1837 to over 1 million by 1900. See the same city that it is today. Wouldn't look the way it does to us right now without this fateful fire. So, Chicago, often called the second city, one of our many nicknames, that nickname due to it being Chicago 2.0, the city that rose like a phoenix from the ashes of this fire. But, you know, I'm not in charge. I'll just say, I think it's more symbolic of the fact that we have cleaned the river up a lot, but we have to keep going. We have to keep stewarding the river forward so that the next generation is able to enjoy this body of water for decades to come. Now, in terms of clean design, on our left, the Reed Murdoch Center, this red brick building coming up on the left. The Reed Murdoch is the closest thing on the river to a style called prairie style. So prairie style is meant to mimic the horizon-hugging plains, prairies of the Midwest. So here you can see long, flat lines, the really wide windows, the red, earthy color, the images of wheat at the top. You can look at the building, kind of imagine the horizon of the prairie, and just relax. Very kind of calming style to look at. Architecture, it can affect your mood. The way a building is shaped, stylized, colored, that can definitely affect how we are feeling. I'm sure we all know this from our own homes, where we work, we go to school. You look at a building every day, it's going to do something to you. So coming up on your right is a building that I look at every day. Nothing but this kind of exposed exoskeleton of a building with structure, and that's about it. Now look, I'll admit, it's not the prettiest building on the store, but it is a very important style nonetheless. From the 60s, banks, courthouses, government buildings, public universities, we've all seen a million brutalist buildings in our lives, including on your left again, in Marina City, the corn cobs. Technically brutalist as well, because they are entirely made. But to look for beauty, just look in front of you. So many cool buildings. Let's start on the right with that white building with all the domes and that biggest ornate dome at the top. That is the Jewelers Building. The Jewelers Building with the dome, built in 1926 to look like an Italian monastery, called the Jewelers Building because jewelers worked in the building in the 1920s, and these jewelers had a car elevator installed so the jewelers could drive their cars full of jewels into the building, take the elevator to their office, park their car there, and avoid being robbed in Prohibition-era Chicago. During the Prohibition period, that's when we banned alcohol in the U.S. for some reason. We had Al Capone running around with all his friends, not the greatest place to be, with a lot of very fancy jewels. And you know what? The only thing I like more than a jewel is gold. On our right, that just look at it. Now, what I love about it, though, is that it was built to resemble the top of a champagne bottle, because that building was built at the height of prohibition of alcohol again, and so people believe it was a sneaky architectural protest against prohibition. Haha, champagne bottle building. Take that, prohibition law. Now, it is real 24 karat gold leaf at the top of that tower. There's 100% gold, because again, that is an Art Deco building. Art Deco, you want the fanciest building possible. How do you do that? You do the Normandy region of France. That Gothic skyscraper with its big flying buttresses at the top, those right angles forming its crown, was home to the Chicago Tribune, a newspaper for about 100 years. But the Tribune, it left that building a few years ago, and now they are turning it into luxury condos, one of which is on sale for $8 million. And then coming up behind that
Ajá, ahí es.
is this Intercontinental Hotel. That's the yellow onion dome building. That is an Art Deco hotel. You see what looks to be a chimney behind the dome? That's actually not a chimney. When that building was built, that was a dock for blimps, Zeppelin balloons, airships. Blimps very popular in the 1930s, and then a certain blimp crashed called the Hindenburg, and they got a lot less popular. So no blimps ever did land there yet. But hey, if any of us own one of the few remaining blimps in the world, there's parking at the top of the Intercontinental. So convenient. But I spy with my little eye. Coming up on the left, a very iconic peacock over there. That peacock is, of course, for NBC. This is NBC Tower, home to NBC Studios Chicago. If you're not from the US, NBC, huge TV network. Then you're looking at the NBC Tower, and you're all experts now. You see deep dark windows, soaring vertical lines, Indiana limestone, tan color. You're all thinking Art Deco. Nailed it. But this building was actually built in 1989. It is a style called Eco Deco. It is a copycat, in this case, of our own Roaring Cheese. On the left will be a tall black building with white antennas for just 4 seconds. Tall black building, white antennas. That is the former John Hancock Center, 5th tallest in the city, and I mention it because it has a beautiful view at the top. There's an observation deck at the top of the Hancock Center called 360 Chicago, incredible 360 view of the city and of Lake Michigan. And I love the lake. To a $20.5 million condo that's 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 floors, and the top of the middle tower, its own private rooftop pool. And hey, just so you all know, because I'm constantly checking, there are some unsold condos left in the St. Regis as of today. So if anyone's in the market for a cozy spot here in town, think about that lovely wavy tower as an option. I've just been trying to point out these amazing real estate opportunities, all of these sweet deals for you today. And speaking of prime real estate, coming up on our left is going to be the only tower directly on the lakefront. Lake Point Tower, this black building coming into view on the left with the also curvy shape and disc at the top. Lake Point Tower, the only tower east of that highway ahead of us, the only one directly on the lakefront. That is due to zoning laws in Chicago that prohibit development of towers that owns the lake, so to speak. So no towers allowed, except some developers in the 60s, they found some loopholes in the zoning laws and have since been closed. Which is why it'll probably be the only tower ever built so close to the lake. Hey, as you can imagine, it's such a popular place to live. Some past famous residents of Lake Point Tower have included Halle Berry, Tom Cruise, Alice Cooper, Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell, Sammy Sosa, Scotty Pippen, just to name a few folks who I've referenced many folks here. Now so the disc up there, first of all, it does not rotate, this opportunity. And it used to be a restaurant. There was a restaurant in this called
Sí, lo sé, padre.